Popular in the Old West with cattle ranchers and range riders for its wide brim keeping the sun and elements at bay, to its ability to add style and flash to early gun shows and modern rodeos. It gained national acclaim in the golden age of movies and with popular television shows. It looks just as comfortable on a famous musician as it does the hard-working everyman, and continues to be used as a tool to flesh out characters and stories beloved by millions. Its form was standardized by one man, and that standard has since captured the hearts of generations. Today, we'll look at the cowboy hat. So long before John B. Stetson came along and standardized the cowboy hat with his boss of the plains, hats in the West were many different shapes, many different sizes, all different colors. A lot of bowlers, a lot of derbies were worn. Sombreros, Mexican sombreros were worn. A lot of wide brim hats. The miners out in California in the 50s in the 1850s were wearing wide brimmed hats. And some of these wide brimmed sombreros, they had really tall crowns on them, and they held bands on those hats. One theory that I saw talking about the 10-gallon hat said that came from a hat that was tall enough to hold 10 galloons, 10 little bands around the hat. And yet another theory for the 10-gallon hat was that it was a take on of the phrase tan gallant, like a gallant man, like a man he looked very gallant, and that changed to 10-gallon. Both of those seem very plausible. And both of those may be true. It could have come from two different places. Some folks would suggest that because of the pictures of like Bat Masterson and a lot of these lawmen back then, where they're pictured wearing derbies, that's all they wore back then. But then you can find pictures of miners, gold miners out in California from the 1850s, that they wore wide brimmed and a little bit taller crown hats. Because they're mining, they're out there panning for gold. They need some sun protection. So I believe that both are true in regards to the types of hats that were worn, because the theory of the shorter crown is that you're a smaller target for outlaws. Now we get into John B. Stetson, who was he's the son of a hatter from New Jersey, Orange City, New Jersey. And he came down with tuberculosis. With Stetson coming down with tuberculosis and a short diagnosis on a lifespan, he decided to go out west. Apparently his dream was to go out west and see the West, see the frontier out there. Well, and the good thing about being out west is that the air is very dry. So that was probably very good for him. And I guess it cleared him up of his tuberculosis, the very dry climate. Well, he goes out and he's hanging out with cowboys and miners, all kinds of people, Civil War soldiers. A lot of them were cavalry officers on both sides of the war, wore cavalry hats, and they were, they didn't look exactly like a modern cowboy hat, but their cavalry hats were more kind of like this. A lot of them had a front pinch. Some of them really didn't have any pinch at all. They were more like a gambler hat, but they were wide brimmed, semi to tall crown hats. They were different. A cavalry hat or I think they called them slouch hats too back then. So that was another influence on John B. Stetson for his release of the Boss of the Plains. So he decided he was going to come up with a new hat, being the son of a hatter. So he goes back to Philadelphia instead of going back to New Jersey, and he started coming up with this hat, and he called it the Boss of the Plains hat. A very wide brimmed, very tall crown hat. And legend has it that a cowboy saw it. I guess a guy riding his horse, he was herding cattle, and he saw John B. Stetson's hat, and he says, "I'll buy that from you." And he bought it for $5. For $5, John B. Stetson sold his first hat, and the rest is history. He built an empire off of that one hat. And before he died, the Stetson Company had over 3,000 employees, and that's in the early 1900s. So he did very well for himself, standardizing a Western hat, a Western style hat. That is, we now commonly call the cowboy hat. And nowadays, cowboy hats can come in many different shapes and many different crown styles. I was looking at crown styles. There was one poster that I found online, and I swear it had probably 15 different crown styles and brim shapes for a cowboy hat, which just goes to show you that you can put your own unique twist on a hat and it's perfectly fine. Like, don't even worry about it. Say, that's not even a real crease. It is a real crease. Whatever you want to crease it with, and you can get that sucker to hold, that's your crease. I mean, you've got your cattleman, you got a low cattleman, you got a brick crease, you've got a gust crease, you've got a front pinch crease, kind of like this one right here. This crease on my Akubra Riverina, that's got its own name. That's a cowboy hats, when they have a telescope crease, it's called a gambler crease. So there's even a little bit of difference. You can have different creases are called different things by different names when they are on different hat styles. But since then, since John B. Stetson came out and standardized the industry, which I think was a wonderful thing to do. I mean, he came out and he set the standard for the Western style hat. You had presidents that wore them: Harry Truman, Lyndon Baines Johnson, Dwight Eisenhower, of course Ronald Reagan. He's probably the most famous. He and Lyndon Baines Johnson are probably the two most famous U.S. presidents to wear cowboy hats, I would think. But Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, Obama wore a cowboy hat, and Trump wore a cowboy hat. Now, a lot of these were just for political functions, and I'm sure just to get votes from folks. A lot of these guys putting on their cowboy hats. So it's not like they wore them all the time, but they did put one on, because the cowboy hat is a pretty iconic image of Americana. You'd be hard-pressed to find a truer image of Americana for around the world. A lot of folks think of America and they think of cowboy hats. They also probably think of other things too, but cowboy hats is one of the things they think of. And the cowboy hat has gone on into everything. You have musicians like Willie Nelson and Merle Haggard, Shania Twain, George Strait. Two of my favorite musicians to wear them are Lyle Lovett and Robert Earl Keen. Another favorite musician of mine is Marty Robbins. With the golden age of Hollywood and the popularity of television in the 60s, with legends like John Wayne and Clint Eastwood, they both made their early, well, John Wayne, his whole career was made out of Westerns. And Clint Eastwood, pretty much his whole career too. He delved into other things later on in his career, but Western's really where he got his start. James Garner, a favorite actor of mine. He played Brett Maverick, and one of my favorite movies, Support Your Local Sheriff. And then you had famous movies like The Magnificent Seven. And then it had a remake here very recently, as did True Grit, the John Wayne picture, and then a remake starring Jeff Bridges. Now, unlike the fedora, the cowboy hat or the Western style hat never really did go out of fashion. It didn't see a really plummet like the fedora did, because even in the 70s on television, shows such as The Dukes of Hazzard, and then you had Smokey and the Bandit, Burt Reynolds wearing his cowboy hat. Cowboy hats never really went out. Willie Nelson stayed popular. Merle Haggard stayed popular. Hank Williams Jr. stayed popular. And his dad, Hank Williams, wore a cowboy hat. The cowboy hat has really stuck around and really been resilient as far as its popularity, its appeal to the American public. It continues to be a work hat. It continues to be a stylish hat. And what's funny is I was thinking during looking at all this, doing the research for all of this, the difference between the cowboy hat and the fedora is a work hat in the city, but it's a play hat in the country. And the cowboy hat is a work hat in the country and a play hat in the city. I thought that was pretty interesting to look at it that way. But then you've even got the Outback styles, you can see Nicole Kidman and Hugh Jackman in their movie wearing their cowboy hats. Although one of them, the one that Nicole Kinman wears, it looks like it's a Federation 4. I'm not sure, but it looks like it's an Akubra. I'm sure that those are Akubras that they're wearing. And the cowboy hat doesn't look like it's going to be going away anytime soon. You still have Stetson that's hanging around out there, and it's still producing very popular models. And then you have Resistol and Bailey. They both are selling just as good as pretty much, I guess, as they ever were. But then you also have Akubra, which has its own models. And then you have the what I like to call the mom and pop hatters. These guys and gals that have taught themselves the craft of hat making, and they are making their own models, and they can actually style you one by hand and measure it out for you to exactly fit your head. So it is handmade for you. And you can get those pretty much for the price of a brand new I don't know, 100 times beaver felt hat from Stetson. You can probably do better and get you a handmade hat that is going to be built to your specifications and to your head. Even get it for a little cheaper than that. Guys like Mike Miller at Northwest Hat, he makes them. Brian Lalonde from Screen Capped Hats, I've seen that he makes them. Kirk Bragman that made this broken skull green Indiana Jones hat for me here, he makes them too. Robert Galt of Wolf Bray, I know he makes them. So you can find many different mom and pop hatters out there. They're on their own, and they're doing a great and fantastic job. The quality, from what I've seen from their clientele, is just top notch, you know. So you'd probably do better to get you a handcrafted hat from one of these guys. That being said, my favorite hat brand or big hat maker, I would have to go with Akubra. Akubra is just fantastic. I've got several of them. They stand up to the weather. And this is an older model Riverina. You can't buy these anymore like this. This is a very lightweight. It's a very thin hat, and it's got the vent holes in it. And I've worn this on a hot day, and it's, you know, it's really treated me kind, and it's even got a liner in it. But this is an older model. But see, so they know what they're doing too when they're making outdoor work hats that look stylish. They look good, and you know, they're gonna perform very well to keep the elements off of you, and you're not burning up out there working in a hat. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this episode on the cowboy hat, because I really enjoyed looking into it. If you have any other information for me, please drop that information in the comments. I would love to hear it. I don't know everything. I never will know everything, and that's fine with me, but I can always be learning about it. That's perfectly fine with me. And that way, if you share it in the comments, folks who like to read the comments, they can learn that too. And that just helps everybody out. All right, well, thanks for coming back, and thanks for letting me come back and sit with you here for a little while. And until we see you again, y'all have a wonderful week, and God bless.